So Vincent challenged me to talk about what's coming next. So what I thought I would do is try to construct a narrative about the future, but I want to show you why I'm choosing that narrative. So I'm going to very quickly, and I absolutely swore I would stay to time, so it will be quite quickly. I'm going to talk about why tokens are a big deal and why they're important. Yes, most of them are scams. Everyone's going to go to jail. Everybody knows that's true. But a regulated token market is going to be one of the biggest new markets in financial assets. Secondly, what are we going to use those tokens for? I'm going to talk to you about digital bearer instruments and why institutional money is looking at digital bearer instruments as the next generation. What can we use those for? Well, we can use them for lots of things, but one of the things we can use them for is currency. So then I'll construct a narrative around future currency. And I hope at the end of this session, you'll be persuaded to think slightly differently about where this is going. So first of all, what are tokens? I think we already know all this. Tokens are, just a particular data structure that's swapped around by consensus applications. I refuse to use the word smart contracts because they're not smart and they're not contracts. Opinions very divided on this. Everybody else says smart contracts. I don't. That's fair enough. The token funding has gone through the roof. Vincent's already told you that. If you look at the amount of money that's going into tokens right now, it doesn't seem to show any sign of slowing down. So even though you'd think that like the low-hanging fruit has gone, more people are coming into this market with new ideas all the time. The big change over the last year has been the emergence of regulation, sort of proto-regulation. I mean, these are recommendations, they're not actual regulations yet. But the point is, the token market, while it's unregulated, of course it will be home to all sorts of scams and crazy things. But once it becomes regulated, things change. What will that regulation look like? These are the proposals from the Swiss regulators. The Swiss regulator, for various reasons, which are to do with Zug and Crypto Valley and whatever. So the Swiss were ahead of the game in ICO because of the strange charitable foundations. You remember when you paid money into an ICO, you thought that you were getting a share in something, but really you were just making a charitable donation, blah, blah, blah. So this is why Switzerland had all the ICOs. This is why the Swiss regulator looked at them first. The Swiss regulators came up with this broad structure which says, well, there are three kinds of tokens. We can think of them as securities tokens, utilities tokens, and payments tokens. And actually, interestingly, and other people have adopted this same structure, but these things aren't fixed. Tokens can change over time. They can start as utility tokens, then become payment tokens, and so on. But more interestingly, you can combine tokens together in new ways. So I'd like to introduce you to a new term. It's not a new term. It's a very old term. It's a new term to you. Digital bearer instrument. So we have the idea that we construct a digital bearer instrument, and that digital bearer instrument is some combination of tokens. You may have some instruments that are only a payment token, some instruments that start as a security token, then become a utility token. But generically, we talk about a digital bearer instrument as a combination of tokens. Why do we call it a digital bearer instrument? For the obvious reason that people want to trade tokens in the first place, which is it doesn't require clearing or settlement. In other words, when I have a bearer instrument, which in the old days was pieces of paper, I have it, I give it to you, you have it, end of story. The digital world disrupted that because I have something, I give you a copy of it, I still have my copy. This causes all sorts of problems. Along come things like blockchain, so we can't do that anymore. So now when I have a Bitcoin, I have it. When I give you the Bitcoin, you have it. I don't have it anymore. This is what we do with tokens. So we have digital bearer instruments. I have a bearer instrument, which is a piece of land, some gold, some money, a share in a company, whatever. When I send you the bearer instrument, now you have it and I don't. We don't need clearing systems. We don't need settlement systems. This is why these markets are more efficient. Digital bearer instruments. Now, before we go any further, it's very important that you don't listen to me about things like this, obviously, because I come from the technology side of things. And as you all know, technologists tend to hype things. You didn't know that? You're looking very surprised. Digital people sometimes hype some of these digital things, right? So you've probably heard people saying, one of the reasons why we like the blockchain is because the blockchain is going to solve the refugee crisis, which is very good. And the blockchain is a very good thing because it's going to stop climate change. It's very helpful. And it's going to solve world hunger and end global poverty and things like that. So all of this is true, I'm sure. No one's explained specifically how it's going to do any of those things, but I'm sure they'll get round to it in time. So don't listen to a technology guy, listen to a finance guy. This is me on stage at Money 2020 in Singapore a couple of weeks ago, and the guy that I'm interviewing is a guy called Jonathan Larson. Jonathan Larson head of innovation at Ping An, one of the giant Chinese fintech companies, insurance company. He also runs their global venture fund, so he's sitting on top of a $1 billion fund to invest in things. He's not a tech guy, he's a money guy. And Jonathan Larson said, and I'm paraphrasing slightly, Jonathan Larson said, when the token markets are properly regulated, we're going to tokenize everything. Everything. Of course. Because bearer markets without clearing and settlement are much cheaper and much more efficient markets. The serious finance guys want to play in markets that are more transparent, better regulated, with ambient accountability, with lower costs, with more. Of course they want to. He said, we're going to tokenize everything. So don't listen to tech guys like me. Listen to what finance guys like this are saying. They're the serious guys. So here's my little model. Like, I am a tech guy, so I can't think about things unless I've got a little model to think about them. So here's my little model that I want you to think about as we move into the next part of the discussion about what we're going to do with our tokens. So we imagine we have some sort of digital value, like, it doesn't matter, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Zcash, whatever. We have some mechanism for moving value around where you can't double spend, right? I send you the value, now you have the value, I don't have it anymore. I don't particularly care what it is, but we have some sort of way of moving this value around. It's just value on a ledger. It doesn't mean anything. Like Bitcoin, it doesn't mean anything. You know, the Bitcoin price, it's not a real thing, right? Like Vincent said about the Bitcoin market cap. You know, there's no such, it's imaginary. There isn't a Bitcoin. The Bitcoin market cap is just the number of Bitcoins out there multiplied by the price of the last Bitcoin. It's not a real thing. You'd never get that money. Apart from anything else, a third of all those Bitcoins are lost forever. Because people, you know, the dog ate the hard wallet, people tore up, they lost the phone, the hard disk is in the landfill. A third of that market cap doesn't even exist. You can never get that money back. Like you said, there's 8 billion euros in the Satoshi wallet. Which, by the way, if anyone's interested in a real startup, the way to think about those 8 billion euros in the Satoshi wallet is it's like a sunken galleon. Remember in the good old days when the English used to raid the Spanish treasure galleons coming back from the Caribbean? And sometimes the galleons would sink, and there's all those gold coins at the bottom of the ocean. And that's how to think about the Satoshi wallet. It's a sunken galleon full of treasure, waiting for people to invent a submarine to go down to it. And that submarine is a quantum computer. So if we had a little whip round here, we could spend $7 billion on building a quantum computer to get that money, and we could make $1 billion. So if anyone's interested in that at the coffee break, come and have a word with me about it. We'll take that further. So then, but those things on the ledgers, they're just numbers. They don't mean anything, right? So what we want to do is we want to link those numbers to assets in the real world. That's the role of financial institutions. So the thing that says, well, there's this number that doesn't mean anything, but we're going to make it mean some gold, some real estate, part of a company, a way you get access to a network. That's an institutional role, and that should be a role of regulated institutions, because we don't want the scams in there. So we have the numbers that don't mean anything. We use institutions to link those to real-world assets, and we can trade those real-world assets pseudonymously. We don't need to introduce the complexities of identity into every transaction. However, at a higher level, we will want to link those tokens to things in the real world because we live in an organized society. And when Bitcoin people tell me, oh, you know, it's great because it's like the right Wild West, I'm like, you're so fucking full of it. If the Wild West was all that, we'd still be living in it. There's a reason why we don't want to live in the Wild West. It's because the Bitcoin people, they're all 12 years old. They don't understand any history. This is why they tell you things like, well, the great thing about Bitcoin, it's like digital gold. We have a digital gold standard. I'm like, really? Do you remember what happened with the last gold standard? I mean, if you put aside the global depression and World War, and I suppose it worked out okay. We don't want a Wild West. We want organized, regulated markets for everybody. The purpose of crypto is not to allow a few insiders and market manipulators and early adopters to swindle the general public out of their money. That's not the point of crypto. We want regulated markets with regulated institutions, and this is a structure that will deliver it. So the next question then is, if we have that regulated market, if we have that institutional structure, what are we going to do with those tokens? One example is money. We could use those tokens to create new kinds of money, which opens up the interesting question, who? Who would create that new kind of money? I can think of 5 examples, that's why I put them in the book. To make them easy to remember, they all begin with C. I don't know much about crypto, but I do know about marketing. 5 C's. Commercial banks, central banks, cryptography companies. So if we start off by looking at commercial banks, we could have commercial banks issuing money. Boring. That's the way it works now. That's what Rabo does now. You thought it was the central bank creates money? No, it's the commercial banks that create money. When you go down to Rabo to borrow 10,000 euros to buy a car, they don't sit around waiting until 10,000 people have come and deposited €1 each and they've accumulated euro. When you come to Rabo to borrow 10,000 pounds to buy a car, they just make it up. They just add it to a spreadsheet. Were we not supposed to tell people that? Commercial banks make money. The private seigniorage on the commercial money issue in the European Union is, I think, if I'm right in saying, about 1,000 euros per person. Banks in the EU make about 1,000 euros per person per year on the private seigniorage of money. We could have central banks do it. We could say, okay, we'll take it away from commercial banks. In fact, there was an article about this in The Economist last week. We could have central banks issue money. Everybody in the Netherlands could just have an account at the Central Bank of the Netherlands, a bit like Hotmail or Google Mail, right? I mean, you know, you think, well, is that really possible? Could the central bank really run 20 million accounts, 30 million accounts? Come on. Facebook run 2 billion accounts. If you're just going to run a central bank for 20 or 30 million accounts, you can probably download that software from the internet for nothing. It's easy. So the central bank, everybody can have an account. And then when the central bank wants to do quantitative easing, instead of giving money to the bankers for them to spend on bonuses and champagne and beautiful auditoriums for speeches, if you want to do quantitative easing, then you can just give the money to people. Rabobank can make up money under the current system. Under this system, the central bank can make up the money. And if you want to boost the economy, you just add 10% to everybody's account. That's what The Economist was talking about last week. It could be cryptography. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe people do want to live in the Wild West. Maybe they don't want institutions. Maybe they don't want regulated markets. Maybe they want to go and live on a stupid private island somewhere built by a billionaire. Good luck. Bye. Have fun. So we could let cryptography do it. I don't think that's going to happen. We could let companies do it. And if you think that's implausible, that companies would just create private money, you're completely wrong. We already have examples of company money. Because cryptocurrencies decentralize this process and make it possible for anybody to issue money, it's obvious that one of the anybodies that would issue money would be companies. And those different kinds of companies would all, you know, they would create different kinds of money for different purposes. But if you think I thought of that, you're wrong. That's an old idea as well. This is Edward de Bono, the man that invented lateral thinking, writing years and years and years ago. And he said, he's a smart guy, and he said, wait a second, if we have some, remember this is before the internet, he said, if we have some sort of network, connects everything together, if you can establish, why would you use money? Why wouldn't companies just exchange baskets of assets? You don't need the intermediary of money if everybody is connected all the time to everything. He's right, of course. Companies could do it. But my point today is that if you could decentralize down to any level, you could actually decentralize down to the level of individuals. Every person in this room could issue their own currency. They wouldn't. But if you could decentralize down to any level, what level would the decentralization end up as? And I think one realistic possibility is community money. I know there's somebody, an ex-World Bank guy in the audience here. If the Washington consensus doesn't hold, and I don't think it will for a variety of reasons, I'm not an economic expert, but I can read the newspapers, you can ask yourself what it would be replaced with, and one possibility would be an idea where you have certain kinds of communities become the new basis for economic action. Regional, I'm a big regionalist, I think we should move towards regions in Europe. But other people think, one way of thinking about regions is as cities and their economic hinterlands. And so it could well be that of all of the different kinds of communities that could issue their own money, maybe cities would be the most plausible candidate. I mean, that's a very interesting line of thinking as well. So we could have commercial banks do it just as we do now. We could have central banks do it. We could have companies do it. We could let cryptography do it. But I wonder if maybe communities might be the answer to bringing these new kinds of money into existence. Now, there's a little difference between those new kinds of money and the old kinds of money that we're used to, and I don't need to lecture you because 60% of you are technologists, and so you know this anyway, and 30% of you are managers, so you won't understand it. So I'll just go through it very quickly. This is smart money. This isn't dumb money anymore. This is money with a memory, money with an API. One of the reasons why the Bank of England report last year said that the transition to digital currency, not cryptocurrency, the transition to digital currency would add 3 to 4% to the economy is because cash doesn't have an API. Smart money does. You can build new stuff on smart money. We can go new places with it. So let's just pretend for one moment you believe that what I said about tokens, they're going somewhere, we can see the regulation, we have this new kind of institutions, maybe it goes down to the study. If all of those things are true, what sort of narrative can we construct about the future for you to have in the back of your minds during the day? Okay, so first of all, every lazy management consultant at every conference ever always includes a slide from William Gibson, the Canadian author, that says the future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed. I'm no different, I'm lazy and a consultant as well, so I'll include it too. I'll go a bit further. If you've actually read any of William Gibson's books, which of course they haven't, if you've actually read any of William Gibson's books, you'll see a much richer vision of the future, which includes the vision for money. This comes from one of my very favorite books, which is called Count Zero. This came out in the early 1990s, and I won't tell the story because I don't want to give it away, but there's a point in the book, it's in the future, the hero of the book is trying to acquire some food and things like that, and he can't. I mean, I'm sure there are plenty of shops here already that won't take cash anymore. You can only pay with cards. He says it wasn't actually illegal to have cash, it's just nobody ever did anything legitimate with it. That's pretty much now. He was writing this 20 years ago. That's pretty much now. I've been in the Netherlands for a week. I was here last week as well. I couldn't even tell you what currency they use. Is it euros? I don't even know. I just pay for everything with my cards. I don't care. The only time you need cash was in the coffee shops, and that's to do with a supply chain issue, which is nothing to do with the relative cost of the transactions. Again, don't listen to technologists like me. I came to my conclusion about cities by looking at the technology. The World Economic Forum, these are people who are supposed to know what they're doing. I mean, there's no actual evidence of that, but let's just assume that they do for the moment. The World Economic Forum, these are the Davos people, they published this last year. They said cities and the wealth of nations, cities not nation states, will determine our future survival. All of the statistics show you the number of people living in cities is growing, people are migrating to the cities, cities are becoming more and more powerful, cities are the origin of economic activity. The mayor of London already has more power than the president of a lot of small countries. You already see things in the newspaper where people in London are asking, can we have our own visa system after Brexit? Lenin once said, are you supposed to quote Lenin inside a bank? I don't know if you're allowed to do that, are you? Lenin once said, there are weeks when years happen. You know, sometimes things just get out of control. What if one of the outcomes of Brexit is the UK leaves the European Union and London rejoins it and has its own visa system, its own financial passporting? This stuff's not crazy. And just to prove I'm not crazy, Vincent thinks I am, but just to prove I'm not crazy, after I put these slides together, I found these two examples. The mayor of Seoul is talking about Seoul beginning to float its own cryptocurrency. I don't know why they call it a cryptocurrency, because it's not, it's a digital currency, but you know, whatever. Paris launched its own currency last week, although it was hilariously French. It was just pieces of paper, sort of like in the 17th century. I call them neo-assignats, but nobody else saw the joke. You have to see, France is the hotbed. It's a historical center of lunatic monetary innovation, which never goes anywhere. Assignats, the Latin Monetary Union, the euro, it never stops. So I'm saying here's this crazy stuff. Cities might be Seoul. The mayor is saying they're planning to launch their own. And then I discover in Berkeley, they're starting to think about doing the first ICO for a community, not for a company. like to replace bond issuing. So if you think I'm crazy, well, Vincent's worse. So thank you very much for listening.
Can I have some questions? Okay, thank you very much, Dave. How big is that market of tokenized assets? Come here. Let's get the questions up. Why no blockchain in the real estate? Yeah. So let me see. Okay. What impact? So you said there's 600 billion in real estate. What impact will it have? You know, because I've been told there's an ICO doing it, but I mean the real companies in a government organized way, if they do real estate and tokenize it, how big is that market? It's about $600 trillion.
No,
I think,
I've seen
right?
it. So at the moment you have to invest in real estate trusts or in companies that manage real estate. But the idea that you would tokenize, you know, you have a development and it's €1 billion and you tokenize it and people can buy €10 tokens, and maybe those entitle them to use the buildings in the future. That's not crazy at all. I think that's a very viable.
Yeah, so then it will completely, you know, that will dwarf all that thing about cryptocurrency. It really doesn't mean anything at the moment. That's just small potatoes.
Yeah.
And you talk to clients. I mean, you are in the financial industry.
Yeah.
Yesterday at Money 2020, you did 9 sessions with all these bankers, and they still listen to you. And they're talking to you and saying, this is really big. We're building systems to do that now.
Well, the situation at the moment is they're building systems to experiment, but they're not going to launch anything until the market is properly regulated. So what you see is inactivity from financial institutions isn't really inactivity. I mean, there's a lot bubbling under the surface. But what they want is that regulated infrastructure. And when that regulated infrastructure arises, you'll see a pent-up demand on the tokenization side. Yeah. So I think the people who are saying, you know, tokens could be $1 billion, $1 trillion market, those people are right. The reason you don't see any evidence of it now is because no banks will do anything
we need that guy
until
there.
it's regulated.
From the Dutch central bank, he needs to get his stuff in order, and then the Minister of Finance need to work together, and then it will be, that will be the big thing. And
well, just remind you, it used to originally be the Bank of Amsterdam. We're going to go back to that. We don't need a Bank of the Netherlands anymore. We need a Bank of Amsterdam.
Okay, wonderful. One quick question. There were people, Facebook and Alibaba, were talking about there was 19,000 banks, and I asked a couple of them, how many do you think will there be in 10 years because of all these DLT and other innovations? How many of those 19,000 banks will be there in 10 years?
I mean, on the retail side, I think the answer is very few.
Because 5 or 10,
most people will do their retail banking in Facebook or Google, or I mean, they won't bother coming to the bank. Remember, the banks have no effective strategy in digitalization. So they talk it up a storm, but they can't actually do anything about it. And the European Commission has just shot them in the foot.
Why?
Because the European Commission has introduced PSD2.
Oh, yeah.
So the
open up the data.
So the European Commission has said the banks have to open up their data to Facebook, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Apple. But there's no reciprocal right for the banks to have access to Facebook and Amazon's data. So the Commission has just handed the whole market over to the internet giants. Yeah. I don't know why, but I'm not a politician. You'd have to ask them.
Yeah, you're a kind of consultant, and luckily you're not a predictor of the future, but you write great books about it and great speeches. Great. If somebody wants to talk further to Dave Birch, you can slowly go to the right, get out here, and pick up a phone, pick up a handset. Thank you very much. Another applause for Dave.